Thank you for joining us to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, a month that focuses on awareness and prevention of sexual assault, harassment, and abuse. This is our inaugural Be the Light for Sexual Assault Awareness event, and it's hopefully the first of many. As you may know, the Victim Rights Law Center is the first nonprofit law center in the country solely focused on providing free legal assistance to survivors of sexual assault. Last year, we helped over 1,000 survivors in Massachusetts and Oregon stabilize their lives post-assault. And through our 4 national training programs, we also trained and supported hundreds and hundreds of professionals throughout the country to improve the national response to sexual violence. But we could not do this without you. Our work is made possible by you, our community. And it's been a long, long time since we have been in a room together. So we are extremely excited to bring our community together in this virtual space. This event is so important as it helps bring light to the VRLC's mission. It raises funds for survivors, and it strengthens the support system for survivors in our communities. So thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm in charge of some housekeeping items, so get ready. We hope that you find the panel interesting and educational, and we encourage you to engage with us if you'd like to. I know some people just want to kick back and have coffee or have their dinner, and that's totally fine too. But we will be in that chat box. So find your chat box, type in any questions you have at any point during the program. They can be for the panelists or for the VRLC, and we'll monitor them and share them with the panel. You can also feel free to keep your cameras on. You know I'm going to be scrolling to see your beautiful faces, so feel free to. But if your video quality is all wonky, you can turn your camera off, no problem, and we will not be offended. There are closed captions for the event. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a CC button. And if you click that, it will show subtitles. And there'll be some detailed instructions dropped in the chat. Please know you are always welcome to donate to support the Victim Rights Law Center in our critical services. The text to give information is like right here by my head somewhere. And a link to donate online and to track our fundraising thermometer throughout the event will be included in the chat box. At the end of the program, we will have an optional breakout room for anyone interested in chatting about the event, networking, or if you just want to say hi. You better believe I'm going to be in those chat rooms because I miss you. So I can't wait to see you. Okay, now for our program. It is an honor for us to feature the podcast Canary, the Washington Post Investigates. When listening to the podcast, I heard so many of the themes that survivors that we work with experience in their journey. Fear of telling their experiences, not being believed, experiencing all of the stereotypes, and of course, the frequent disappointment in the criminal justice system. In working with survivors, we know that justice looks different for every survivor. The VRLC was founded to provide civil legal services because a survivor might not want to engage in the criminal justice system. And even if they do, it might not give them the justice that they're looking for. I want to give a heartfelt thank you to everyone on the panel tonight for creating this amazing podcast, and then for joining us tonight for this really special event. We're really honored. And to Lauren and Carole, as a survivor myself, I want you to know that I'm extremely grateful for having you be here with us tonight, as well as sharing your experiences with our community. It really means a lot to us. I will now turn over the event, so you can get rid of me, you're welcome, to a media executive extraordinaire. She's vice president and executive editor at Crown Publishing, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. Her work throughout the years has been recognized by 5 Emmys, 2 DuPonts, 3 Peabody Awards, just a few awards. But tonight, she joins us as the executive producer of Canary, the Washington Post Investigates. Please welcome our moderator, Madhulika Sikka.
Hi, everybody, and hi, Stacy. Thank you and the Victim Rights Law Center for holding this event and for bringing us together for a conversation that I hope will be informative and inspiring. So I'm going to introduce the other people in the panel, and we will get to how we came together to tell this story. But I want to start with my former colleague at the Washington Post, Amy Brittain. She's an investigative reporter who joined the Post in 2013 and has worked on stories related to the criminal justice system, sexual assault, harassment, and misconduct. She is from Shreveport, Louisiana, and she studied journalism at LSU and earned a master's degree in investigative journalism at the Stabile Center at Columbia University. In 2016, she was a reporter who shared in a Pulitzer at the Post in national reporting. She's also won a Polk Award, a Mirror Award, and a James Beard Award, actually for the very first story that was the genesis of what turned out to be Canary, a story about Lauren Clark, who you're going to meet shortly. And she's twice been named a finalist for the Livingston Awards, which honors young journalists in America. The podcast that she reported and hosted, the Washington Post Canary, the Washington Post Investigates, was named one of Apple Podcasts' top 12 podcasts of 2020. Hi, Amy. It's nice to see you again virtually. Lauren Clark has lived and worked in Washington, D.C. for more than a decade. After experiencing sexual violence, she began her own journey as an advocate, both locally and nationwide, speaking out particularly against failures in the criminal justice system, and speaking up for herself and others. She believes in the transformative power of sharing stories and continues to work to create a world that welcomes truth and supports healing. Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
And Carole Griffin grew up in the West End of Birmingham, Alabama. She graduated from Rice University and worked as a baker in Austin, Texas. Spent a year working and traveling the French countryside, and came back to open the Continental Bakery in English Village in October 1985, serving artisan French breads, croissants, pastries, and coffee. I'm getting hungry thinking about that. And in 1995, Carole opened Chez Lulu, featuring oven-based cuisine. And as for those of you who listened to Canary know, Carole is kind of famous, Birmingham famous. So we're really grateful to have you here. Now, I am going to assume that many of you have listened to the Canary podcast. I will ask everyone to talk a little bit about their experience, but the Cliff Notes version is Lauren was the victim of a sexual assault. Interestingly enough, her case actually did get through the criminal justice system and went to court, which actually doesn't happen very often. But unfortunately, there were cracks in the sentencing and things fell through those cracks with regard to the penalty for her attacker. And Lauren really fought to highlight those problems. And that is the first story that Amy told about that led to Canary. And in a remarkable twist of fate, the story got to Carole in Birmingham, Alabama, and Carole wrote to Amy and said, I have something to share with you. And turns out that the judge involved in in Lauren's case actually assaulted Carole as a young woman many decades ago. And that is the story that we told in Canary. So I wanted to start with just each of you giving a very short just introduction to your experiences. And let's start with Amy on this story.
Okay. First of all, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure. This is the first time that Lauren, Carole, and I have actually been together since the meeting that you all hopefully heard at the end of episode 7, which actually took place in 2019. So in many ways, this is kind of a reunion of sorts for our group. My journey started with my job as an investigative reporter. I look for stories that expose wrongdoing. That is kind of the definition of investigative journalism and what makes it different from other forms of journalism. And I was drawn to Lauren's story initially because I felt like it was a really powerful opportunity to tell a story that we don't tell as often as we should as journalists. I had just come off a run of coverage looking at sexual misconduct by high-profile individuals like Charlie Rose, the CBS News host. And Lauren's story, in many ways, was actually more compelling to me because she was an ordinary person in an ordinary city who had this experience. And if you look at what happened to her case right after she was assaulted, there were many indications that this should have been a result that, as she said, it should have been a slam dunk in the criminal justice system. And I think where the power of the story lies is in following it through the system and looking at the points, like Madhulika said, the cracks in the system, how systems fail, how someone like Lauren, whose attacker confessed and pleaded guilty, you know, can end up in this position, and how she can end up in a position years later where she's posting those flyers around the city. So that's really what drew me to this. And as a reporter, I remember I thought I was done with her story. I actually have this ritual after I finish a story where I like to clean my desk because it gets really messy in the process of reporting a long story. So I like to just like get the Clorox wipes out, like start putting stuff in filing folders, and I cleared it off. I'm like, all right, done, moving on. And then I got this email from Carole in Alabama. And that email really changed my life. I never thought I would ever do a podcast. I had no experience in audio journalism, but it set me on this path of reporting this story. And it's hands down, I would say, the most powerful story I've ever been a part of in my investigative reporting career. And I think that in the moment where Carole and I initially connected over the phone, and she told me why she had reached out to me, it was a moment that to me crystallized just how pervasive the issue of sexual assault is. You know, that moment became clear to me in a single phone call. I never could have imagined that she would be calling to say that Judge Truman Morrison had sexually assaulted her. And I just remember just kind of sitting there completely floored, stunned, almost speechless. And 18 months later, we put out the series and shared the story with the world. So that's kind of my role in this, and it's a pleasure to be with you all this evening.
Thanks, Amy. Now, Lauren, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you were motivated to sort of take this in your own hands and literally put up flyers around your neighborhood, just publicizing what happened in your case. I mean, people don't like to talk about this. You know, as I say, most cases never make it to the court system, and yours did, but it didn't quite satisfy. And I think, you know, that step when you said, okay, I'm going to take this into my own hands, how did you decide that, and why was it important to you?
Hi, everyone. I think so. After the initial hearing where I made my first statement, I wanted to move toward, you know, doing volunteer work and advocacy work and like working on supporting survivors and, you know, just kind of getting involved. And exactly a year after I was attacked, actually on the same route that I ran that night, I organized a march with the organization Take Back the Night. And that was the first time, you know, I shared my story on Facebook and with people that I knew. And I think from that point on, I always kind of felt like that label was with me. And, you know, obviously everything that comes with that experience and dealing with the repercussions of it and the aftermath, it felt with me, you know, it felt like a part of my life. And when I found out what happened with his case, that I hadn't been informed about, you know, his sentence being changed and that he was working down the street from me, it just kind of occurred to me that everybody knows that I was assaulted. Nobody knows that he did it. Why? Like, why am I protecting this person? Why am I willing to put my name out there and be vulnerable? And why am I leaving his name out of the story? And I think that's kind of where it developed from. I was carrying it and it just really seemed like this person wasn't. And then encroaching on my space and the lack of, justice from the justice system, it just didn't make sense to me. And I was like, wait.
I think that's a really interesting insight, particularly since you're, you weren't accusing someone without, you weren't just throwing it out there. This was something that had gone through the legal system, and this man had confessed, and yet still he was sort of anonymous. It's really fascinating, and the power of what you did is really extraordinary. Now, Carole, it's kind of remarkable that I will say, lengthy piece in the Washington Post about Lauren's story. You had to get in there deep to read that the judge was Judge Truman Morrison, and sitting in Alabama. So don't say that the power of journalism doesn't reach far and wide across America. And seeing this name just launched your response ultimately to make the decision to reach out to Amy and tell her your story for events that happened decades prior. And I think we know it's very common for people who have been subjected to sexual assault to either never talk about it or really delay raising it. And I'm wondering sort of your thinking behind that and how it took you that long to get there. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that, and what was the thing that finally was like, okay, I need to talk about this.
Thank you. That's a great question. And thanks everybody for being here and allowing us to be here. I mean, it is truly so meaningful to be back together with you guys, Amy and Lauren. I think that my family, if you've listened to the podcast, the family component of it was especially complicated. And it was kind of an open secret in my family and extended family that something had happened, that I had been molested at the age of 16 by Judge Morrison. I was not sure who knew about it beyond my family. I didn't know what they knew. I didn't know details. It was really not to be mentioned, basically. I feel like, Truman, or Tim, as we called him in the early days, was just a hero of the family. It was, he was a very trusted and lauded person in our family. So once this happened, I think the whole family sort of came together to kind of forgive him, before I think I even realized the impact of what it was having on me. There was my mother at first kind of, I think didn't know how to talk to me about it, probably was struggling with some guilt and issues of her own, but I was really not centered from the beginning. And there were a lot of sort of allowances and accommodations made for Judge Morrison's behavior. So it was a confusing message from the early days of it. It was not that it was entirely secret. It's just that it was not addressed appropriately, I think, in my family. So I just kind of learned to just kind of suck it up. And I knew that I began to understand that it was having a very devastating effect on me. I dealt with it myself by going to therapy and by just kind of managing it myself. And I felt like the family, I feel like the message has been, and I feel like this is kind of, I feel a kinship with Lauren about it. It's sort of like, you're handed, Shay and I talk about it, you're handed a 75-pound backpack that you didn't ask to hold and you didn't give consent to hold it, and you carry it, for however long, in my case, for decades. I carried that 75-pound backpack, and I thought it was just my lot in life. You know, it was what had happened to me, and it was what I had to carry. But I think it was a strange event that I even found out about it. It felt quite important. It was actually my ex-husband who read the article, who came across Judge Morrison's name. Of course, he knew this had happened to me, and he had to discern whether he would even bring it up to me. He was afraid it would upset me. But so when he brought it to my attention, I think what he didn't realize, and what just became apparent to me suddenly, was that it implicated Lauren, that I was sort of bucking up and kind of handling it in the independent way that I thought I was supposed to do it, until I heard that somebody else. And then it became, you know, obvious to me that possibly my silence had meant that maybe there were other girls who he had molested. And I just felt the weight of that. And I really did not want to call Amy, but I sort of, you know, sat with that for a while, and then finally decided that I felt it was my obligation, or that, you know, I needed to do it. So I called her, and at first I asked her if she would just tell Lauren. But I ended up telling her the story, which was really the first time I think I told somebody who was not my family and who was not so completely confused about the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And Amy was so clear.
I do want to come back to the issue of family and how one talks about these things and the difference in 30 years ago versus now. But Amy, you know, I of course remember when you heard from Carole and we discussed sort of pursuing this story, and we didn't know where it was going to go. I was just like, go talk to her, let's keep taping it and let's see what emerges. And of course, you know, one of the things one thinks about is, well, is there something that, you know, could there have been other women like this? What is his judicial philosophy? What can we tell about how he has ruled on cases around this issue? And I'm wondering if you could sort of let the audience know the challenges of trying to do that, and why we tried to do it. But people think it's like, oh, scrape the data and we'll find out. But just talk a little bit about that, because it was very important for us to look at that in its totality.
Right. So, I mean, as a news institution, we look for, you know, obvious news value in a story of this nature. And then I also felt like we felt a need to kind of widen the lens a little bit and kind of make sure that we're looking at all aspects of the system, you know, and we hear that from Lauren's story, how the system fails. And then when I'm talking to Carole, you know, she's asking me very valid questions about, well, has this affected how he's ruled as a judge? You know, what can we learn about him as a judge? And, you know, I promised her that I would look into it. And Madhulika, you and I had a lot of discussions about this. And anyone who's listened to episode 6 of Canary knows that we hit a lot of brick walls in the effort to kind of try to get an answer to that question. And I was actually thinking about this today, just in advance of the conversation. And I think that, you know, you want to be able to definitively say yes or no, this person ruled, you know, in a way that was out of bounds or not. But the difficulty of it is that, first of all, we didn't have the data, and we didn't have the data because of reasons that Judge Morrison wrote about. There's not a lot of oversight with the judicial branch when it comes to recording case data, letting people compare from judge to judge, even allowing people to search judges' cases in an easy way is not a thing that exists. But even I was thinking today that even if we did have all of that data, we would have still hit a wall, and that you can never really know what someone is thinking, you know, when they're making a decision of that nature related to a sexual assault case. So even if we had found a correlation or something, I think we would have still had, you know, some challenges in making that potential connection between the concept that someone could have committed sexual assault and then potentially have been more lenient in certain cases. So I think like the beauty of the process of Canary and reporting it is that, all aspects of the reporting journey are, even the messy ones, are out there for the public to dissect, and we didn't want to brush over this and act like everything was perfect or that we had definitive answers. We wanted to be honest and transparent with the listeners about what our limitations are as investigative reporters. And to me, those stories can sometimes be a little bit more powerful than even the really clean cut ones that work out exactly as you hope. And I think it was important for us to share that with the public.
Yeah, and that, we did feel very strongly about that, in essence, to show our work. And I found it fascinating. And, I'm sure many of you who are on this Zoom work in the legal system every day and probably knew this, but I didn't really know how hard it was to really examine the record of judges. It's like they become a judge and that's it, right? There's really no accountability. There's no way of really checking their work.
I have some crazy stories of like the fact that, first of all, I have the resources of the Washington Post behind me. Like we're owned by Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, right? So I have the ability to take out cash to pay for transcripts. But you think about the fact that people who don't have the resources or the training that we have, like what barriers they might come across in trying to get transcripts or to look into cases. And like the rule in DC is that if you're not an attorney, you have to pay for these transcripts in cash. So I would go to the ATM and take out hundreds and hundreds of dollars in cash and then take the metro to the courthouse and have to pay for it with exact change down to the cent, or they would not accept my application, like to look at even Lauren's court records.
Yes, folks, it is the 21st century, in case you were wondering. It's really remarkable. Now, Lauren, when Amy did come around to telling you about this project, that your story had in fact not ended, as these things usually do, and that we were pursuing the story, and you heard about Carole. I'm just wondering, what struck me was just the power of your reaction to it. And then ultimately, of course, you both met. And I'm wondering if you can talk sort of about the meaningfulness of that the power of somebody sharing a story because you shared a story, and what that did for you and how you felt about it.
It feels like such a hard thing to talk about. And I feel like Carole and I talked about that when we met. Like weren't really words, there's photos of us holding each other's hands. And I feel like that photo is so powerful. The first time I saw it when Canary came out, I gasped and like felt kind of flooded by a lot of the same emotions that I felt when I met Carole. Obviously there's, some pain and sadness to know that, Carole has been harmed by another person. And to know that this person is making decisions that affect people's lives and affected mine. But there was a lot of beauty and love and meeting her and seeing her bravery. It's hard to speak on, but it's powerful,
Yeah. Well, I think that the strength that, the strength of the connection between you two, connected by your stories, is so resonant. And Carole, hearing your parents as well, and sort of the evolution of your parents' response to this, I think that one of the reasons why we felt very strongly that this story needed to be told, and as Amy has said, she has done breaking stories on famous people who have done this stuff, who have been assaulters and, just terrible, terrible people. And we had so many of these stories, but for us, the power of your story was that I personally felt that people are going to hear this, and there are going to be so many reactions amongst so many women who have some version of a family friend a relative, someone trusted in the community, and that they had experienced something like you did. And for decades and decades, it was just, you know, not even talked about. You would never dare raise it. And I'm wondering about sort of your parents' evolution and what you would say to parents now whose kids may come to them with a story somewhat like yours, and how to deal with that. And I think the other remarkable thing is, you know, your own son, you know, you did tell your own son about it too, which I think is an incredibly powerful thing to do for mothers who want to bring up boys right.
Mm-hmm. I realize that this is a really, it's kind of a hard area for me, because I didn't have the imagination almost to know what I could expect or hope for from my parents in that situation. They handled it the best they could, but I think Amy came to me in a way, brought to me some things that I never imagined I could have, a dispassionate sort of listener, a good listener. And so I would say, you know, not dispassionate, but you know what I'm saying, like somebody who doesn't have a dog in the fight, basically. And my folks, you know, they felt guilty. They felt responsible. They were very allied with this man. They were very good friends with him. They were groomed by him as well as me. So I think, you know, I would say for a parent who's talking to a child who's bringing forward this sort of information, maybe to be aware that, especially if it's a friend of the family, that they are also experiencing a betrayal and a kind of loss, a kind of injustice, a kind of trauma themselves, and that bringing some awareness to that fact and dealing with some of that themselves on their own time to prepare themselves for being able to help their child. Because I think that these things bring up, you know, the parent's responsible for the kid. And it's a heavy responsibility when something like this happens. And there's a lot of terrible feelings that come up. And I see that in my parents. I see the weight, the burden that they carry through this process of healing that we went through during the podcast, basically. But so I would say to, you know, get some help, process what's happening for yourself, put your, you know, the thing that drops down in the airplane, put it on yourself before you turn to help your kid get that thing on. And then to just basically reassure the child that they are centered in the process, that you believe them, that they're the most important thing in this whole situation, not to catastrophize it to the kid, to say that sexuality is not bad, but it's something that your body just is not ready for, you know, and to say that, you know, if they're confused, of course they're confused. This is a confusing situation. Just to bring your best listening self, your best reflective self, your best mirroring self, whatever, to have the child feel centered and to tell them that they're safe, that they're loved, that they didn't cause it, that it's not their responsibility. All of those things that you hear, be explicit, say those words to your children, I think.
I just want to break in here to say to people, we would love your questions for Carole and Lauren and Amy, so please feel free to put them in the chat. They're all remarkable people who I think we can learn so much from. And I just want to say at this moment, as you know, a journalist and as someone who helped bring Canary to the world, that our thanks to Carole and Lauren, because if people don't tell their stories, we can't have these discussions. And I want to thank you both for trusting Amy and trusting us at the Post to bring this story out to the world. Go ahead, Carole.
I just want to say about Amy's process that the thing that was so miraculous to me was when I went into it, when she said, I think this is an important story, and we decided to do it. I think so many people come forward like, I am woman, hear me roar, because they've processed it and they've made a decision. And I felt like it was important to show how messy for myself the whole process of coming forward was, and to walk through that with Amy. And Amy met me right there, and we did that very brave, sort of vulnerable work together. And when I heard the podcast, I felt like that was what that was healing to me, but I think it gave the podcast such life, you know. So I just wanted to mention that. I thought that was cool.
Well, the questions are coming in. So to both Carole and Lauren, I think you can take them one at a time. Lauren, if you start, did either of you have a lawyer supporting you during the process? And do you have thought on what difference that might have made for you? So Lauren.
Yeah, definitely. Well, in the beginning, there was a guilty plea. There wasn't a trial. I didn't really think that I needed a lawyer. I didn't really understand what I was getting into. It was just like, okay, this person pled guilty. You know, there's going to be a sentencing, and like I have the option to say something. And then I maybe a little over a year later, when I found out he was working down the street, and found out that there wasn't much of a protective order situation, then I found a lawyer through NVRDC, the Network for Victim Recovery of Washington, D.C. And Kristen is my hero. Having her, not just having an attorney, but having an attorney who is trained and trauma informed, made all the difference in the world. Like someone I could talk to and relay information and my feelings and like what was coming up for me, who knew how to take it and handle it and how to respond to me in sensitive and trauma informed ways. But then also like, you know, this is our legal plan, and explain to me everything, every step of the way. So I actually knew what was going on. Yeah, it made a world of difference.
And one thing that you guys, I guess we didn't say this in the podcast, but at the end of episode 4, when I'm telling Lauren about Carole for the first time, Kristen was actually in the room. Because by that point, I had met Kristen several times, and, you know, Kristen had actually, you know, facilitated the initial interviews with Lauren. So when I knew that I wanted to meet with Lauren, I think I even CC'd Kristen on that email, because I knew it was going to be a difficult conversation, and I felt like it would be helpful for Lauren to have Kristen there. And also, I really respect Kristen and her perspective on all of this, and I was curious for her to hear this as well, just to kind of know what path we were going down at that point.
Carole, did you ever have any dealings with a lawyer during any of this at all?
The only lawyer I had a dealing with was the one who molested me. I mean, that's not a funny thing, but yeah, no, I did not. And I didn't ever consider it until just recently. And even just being a part of this group, I just think I was robbed of so much. I feel like there was such a theft of so much of my life, but that sense of advocacy for myself, I think, is just hugely valuable. And I wish I had had it. And sometimes I think even now I would walk through that process. I never dreamed that I would be willing to take him to court. It's moot now, but if I'd had the chance, I would now.
And Carole, there's another question for you. I think I know the answer to this, but after Amy did reach out to Judge Morrison, did he reach out to you or your family in any way at all?
No, he did not. And he actually, I think, continued to communicate with my uncle, who's a Lutheran minister. I heard a little bit of continuing kind of, I would just call it justification, really, or just kind of curiosity about why this would even have been important for me to do. It's been just really hard for my family to understand it, but no, he's reached out.
And another question, this is for you, Lauren. What's the current status of Jairo Cruz, the man who attacked you? Do you know?
His sentence has been served. I mean, as much of it as they made him serve.
Okay.
I honestly was like very like over it. People ask me what he's doing and what, you know, and I feel like after I did everything I could do, and especially after the story came out, everything changed for me. I didn't feel like I needed to know where he was anymore to feel safe.
Right.
So I don't know. I think someone mentioned to me maybe that he was, you know, not working in a restaurant. But as far as I know, like his sentence was over 5 years after the first initial sentencing. So, and I believe that he did take that assessment. I mean, the judge said that he would make him. So,
right. Now, Lauren, I know you've talked about advocacy work, and I'm just wondering, it's a question that is about the interaction with service providers or people who assist survivors. And I'm wondering if you could talk about what form your advocacy work takes and whether you've interacted with people who are helping survivors.
Yeah, I think while, you know, still kind of emotionally processing a lot of what was happening, and you know, I was getting involved while I was still dealing with this situation. So really it was important for me to be aware of like what I could take on and like have boundaries where I needed them, and to be supportive of others, but also like really be honest with myself about what I could handle. But I've done a lot of work with NVRDC. I mean, they're my heroes. This without them would have been impossible. And so whenever I have the opportunity, I try to help work with them, organizing events and fundraisers, you know, things like this. And I really think that for me, it feels like sharing my story was part of this, all of this work, you know, was part of helping survivors. And I think that is what has felt like the biggest, how I've been able to make the biggest impact, because I could tell my story, a lot of things in my, you know, corner to my advantage that made it one that people were willing to receive.
Right. Amy has a question for you. This was a long story, could have been longer. Did you ever have to fight to be able to continue, or was the Post all in for this whole ride?
How much time do we have to answer that question? You know, I think that as a reporter, I'm always used to the process of pitching stories, advocating for stories. As I've grown into my job and gained more confidence as a young reporter, I've really learned to trust my gut. And, you know, I think that if you're centered in what you're pursuing and the reasons that you're pursuing it, yes, there are cases in which you have to kind of make other people in the room believe in it, you know, and this was an interesting challenge because I'm someone who is not a podcast host, had no experience. Well, I am now, but I was not at the time. So I had no experience doing audio. And the Post had never done an investigative podcast before. And I kind of, you know, came back from that initial trip where I first met Carole in person. And I had hours and hours and hours of tape, the tape that you hear in episode 2 and 3 when I'm in Birmingham for the first time. And I came back and I said, I think we have something here. Like, what, this seems to be more than like a daily podcast episode. Like, and I talked with Rena Flores, who was the eventual producer for Canary. And I said, will you just listen to this, like spend the weekend and listen to it. And she came back after that weekend and she described the tape as like a treasure trove. And From that point on, we really started to put together kind of a game plan of how we would pitch it to people like Madhulika. We put together outlines. There's a pitch document that I actually found recently that we wrote in August 2019 with like the tone, the mood, like what it would sound like, what it would seem like, who the audience would be. And it's really remarkable to go back and kind of look at that process, because for Rena and myself, the summer of 2019 was such an invigorating, creative time. And I've never had a period like that at the Post where we were just like sitting in conference rooms and thinking, if we had all the budget and resources in the world, what could this be? What could this look like? How many episodes would it be? What would it sound like? And I never had the chance to do that before, because my job is such a fact-driven job, and this just felt like I was using a different part of my brain. So Rena and I were partners kind of in the trenches from day one on this. And then Team Canary, as we call ourselves, Team Canary grew and grew to encompass more people. And by the time we reached the point of getting over the threshold of publication, I absolutely felt like the full weight of the paper was behind us. And I think the challenge of investing in an investigative podcast is that from a reporting standpoint, you never want to put the cart before the horse. We're not going to script something or create something when we don't know where the reporting will lead us. So for a long time in the process, I felt like I was kind of in like a yellow light zone. Like I'm just going like, proceeding with caution. No one's telling me to stop. Everyone's telling me to keep going. And so we're going to go and we're going to see where this leads. And ultimately, it was just a process that was really organic. And I think that's the beauty of it. And hopefully what you guys hear when you listen to it, this is not some, smooth, slick production. This is organic. This is messy. This is how reporting happens. And I think that hopefully it represents that I didn't go into this thinking I'm going to create an investigative podcast. I went into this going to Birmingham and then came back and realized, wow, this could be powerful. What could the path forward look like for this project?
I'll just add that it was definitely, we'll go out and see what you get and keep looking. And as it was the first investigative sort of standalone podcast we were doing. So, the pitch came to me and then I talked to some investigative editors, and we make the pitch to the bosses, and it's a process. And it took a while because we also had no idea where it was going to go, where it was going to end up. But ultimately, I think every one of us is really proud of what we did. I can't believe we've really almost run out of time. I do want to address one question here, that because people always ask this question with regard to the Washington Post. What role could Jeff Bezos, as owner of the Washington Post, take in helping shine a light on this still awfully hidden emotional and physical violence? People find it very hard to believe, but Jeff Bezos really does leave the newsroom alone. He's obviously invested in the Washington Post, so that's the most important thing he's done by buying the Post a few years ago, but he is really not a factor in the decisions that are made in the newsroom. So I just sort of want to be clear about that. But he's retiring as chairman of Amazon now, but I think he's going to focus his attention on space or something.
Actually, his ex-wife has shown far more interest in investing in charitable causes. I don't know if you've been following that, Madhulika.
Yeah.
Interesting.
She's
kind of what she's poured her money into. So
yeah, but just so you know that they don't. He doesn't. I think I only ever saw him once in the 2 years that I was at the Post. So, well, we're really out of time. That happens so fast. I really would love to thank the Victims' Rights Law Center for noticing Canary and bringing this event together. Undying gratitude to Lauren and Carole for telling their stories, because if you don't tell your stories, we don't do what we do. And it is a sacred trust that we hold as journalists to look after you and your stories. And I hope that we did that appropriately. And to Amy, the awesome, intrepid dogged reporter who I actually miss seeing because I haven't seen her in over a year in person. And I hope for all of you listening, I hope that Canary has been an important tool for you. I hope that you share it largely and widely. And for those of you who are on this this meeting who have been victims of any kind of sexual assault or violence, I think Lauren and Carole are incredible inspirations for the notion that when you are ready to tell your story, there can be such power in it. And we hope that that gives you something to think about. So I'm going to hand it back to Stacy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, that was incredible. Like the fastest 60 minutes of my life. Thank you all so much. And I just want to say as well that we work with so many survivors who may never reach a point in their healing where they want to share their story in a public way. And that's okay too. And to know that there are resources available for everyone, no matter where they are in their journey and in their healing. Feel free to check out our website at victimrights.org. We can also connect you to resources as well. So thank you to Lauren and Carole and Madhulika and Amy. This was just an incredible event. We're so grateful to you. I mean, what an engaging conversation around sexual violence, the media, the criminal justice system. I was literally on the edge of my seat. So thank you for coming to speak to our entire community. It really means a lot to us. Our call to action today is to listen to survivors, to believe survivors, and to volunteer in your community. We always need more help, more hands, and more minds. So don't hesitate to get involved. There are so many ways to help survivors, and we encourage you to do so.